because it's actually pretty easy for us to tell you which of your friends on email, phone, Facebook, LinkedIn aren't registered, because we can tell whether they're in the database or not.
You said that other similar groups got their websites completely destroyed. Do you have an automation process if that happens to you to recreate it with another provider?
Yes. So we took pieces and buried them, in certain places so we could stand it back up, and the database every night, saves itself and walls itself off. For that reason, it's mostly a problem for reclaiming the credibility of your email accounts and your text messaging accounts, because once you start spamming, the commercial providers that undergird those on the email and SMS networks will flag you as a spammer, right? And then groups like vote.org, they essentially have cold domains now, and they have to warm them back up. And so they have to establish emails that connect to people and people respond to, and there's warm conversations in order to be treated like a normal entity again. So it's a serious inconvenience. And in particular, lots of people lost enormous amounts of data. So we do have that on our end. And we just try to make it, we're using still public information that the state would have anyway. So honestly, the only reason they're hitting us is to prevent the actual effort from underway. But yes, we thought of that. It's probably not robust enough is the answer. Yes.
So given who we are, I feel obligated to ask this question. On the one hand, hearing that, you eventually like to make a tool where I could find 500 people who love digital civil liberties in Austin, and I can turn them into my little army of lobbyists. Sure, that sounds wonderful. But I have to say, Currently this tool, I don't have much of a problem with it. It's public data.
Yep.
It doesn't tell you anything about anybody. But as you said, to make it more and more effective, I could see the temptation to slowly add more and more and more data. How do you prevent this from becoming a Cambridge Analytica weapon?
Yes. So Cambridge Analytica, for those of you who don't know, was a social graph company that worked for a billionaire named Robert Mercer, who was affiliated with Ted Cruz. And he deployed this whole company on behalf of Ted Cruz in the 2015 and 2016 primary. When Ted Cruz lost, they then switched and made it available to Donald Trump. And they ran what they called psychographic profiling on everybody from Facebook quizzes that they'd been running for years, which Harry Potter character are you? And then they would profile those people and then claim to be able to predict their behavior and what they like and that sort of thing, right, with the social graph, to better target advertisements.
As part of that, they pull all their friends.
Yes, so the way that Facebook's original Graph API worked, it wasn't just them, right? This is like a feature, not a bug. Facebook's social graph let you pull, if you are all my friends on Facebook and I take the quiz about which Harry Potter character am I just gave away all of your data. And that's how Facebook was designed to work. And it was very valuable in those days. And I'm really annoyed that we didn't capture all of that in time. And I'll tell you why. So there are 7 subsidiaries of Cambridge Analytica now. So Cambridge Analytica lied about taxes. They did a bunch of dumb stuff. It's not illegal to use Facebook's tool the way that they did. It is illegal to shelter funds and illicitly pay for various criminal actions in foreign countries that have much harsher laws than we do. And their whole company, and they violated a number of laws about spying and espionage in Britain, because Britain has stronger privacy laws. And they completely folded, but not before selling off chunks to 7 subsidiaries, all owned by the same guy still, right? So one of them is here in Austin and was working on behalf of Texas candidates. And there's essentially, the way I look at it is, we've all built these social graphs, right? We've given over our data to Facebook and Twitter and Google in exchange for something, right? I get Gmail as a result of letting Gmail read the contents of every email I send, right? And Gmail uses that to build learning, it does language learning, and it improves recommendations for how I should respond and all of that. But the company is using my data for their purposes and to sell. And I think it would actually be really good to take all of that information and make it publicly available so you can use it for your purposes. So our idea is not to put publicly on a map my name and all the things I care about in my tweets and everything else. It's instead to make it easy for you to log in through your Gmail account or your Facebook and see all of those exports from that GDPR forces these companies to make compliant, and then to turn around and let you use that for whatever issue advocacy you want for your friends, but not for you to give away your friends' contact information to some third party. Because the difference is, what they essentially did was they turned all of us into unwitting participants in giving away each other's privacy. And that doesn't feel right. But if we instead turn it around and you can use your friend network that you have, right, in email, just like if you're a very good extrovert, you could list your friends by what they care about and invite them to the right events. But not everybody's good at that. Not everybody has time to keep track of that. But if we make it very simple for people to array their own neighborhood, their own friends that they already have contact information to, and to inform them when somebody might be interested in a particular event, and not sell that to the toothpaste companies of the world and everybody else. I actually think that would be a fairer playing field, because there are all these people out there that have taken that information from us already. And so it's kind of interesting to me to be able to see what it is what kind of person they think I am. And since I have 3 younger sisters on my Netflix account, I can tell you no entertainment company knows what the fuck I like. Because I checked.
Remember, inject noise into the signal, people.
Yes.
Keep it up.
Have you done any, like looking back at, you've done the work to register these people, track that process and gone back to see if they actually did vote?
We did. So I got 82% of these people ended up voting. And I say I got, the organization achieved that. But like we only sent the one reminder, and mostly it's the work of volunteers on the ground who actually did that contacting. But yeah, so that was what we can see so far.
So follow up to that is, has there been any effort to contact the people that didn't vote?
There has not yet. There's a second skin of this that will go up to a particular subset, which are people who got registered but did not vote. And a series of survey questions that are designed to just say, like, what would you actually want? Like, you theoretically are king of the government for a day. How would you do it? What do you want? And then from that, we would like to make that available to like Gallup or Pew to publish, so that people, hopefully Republicans and Democrats alike, would look at that and say like, okay, like I know how to talk to those people now and what they might care about to go get them to vote for me. And in my mind, that takes the arms race into the realm of what it's supposed to be. Very idealistic. Don't know.
See if the percentages of reasons why they change. Sure. After the effort, like.
Yeah, exactly, because they went through the effort of signing up, getting mailed a thing, filling it out, didn't send it back, got all these emails and text messages, ignored them, right? So like clearly something, most likely they got busy, they went on a vacation, they don't check their mail regularly. How many of you have mail lying on your counter unopened right now? Like I bet, yeah, exactly, see? And so there's just things like that come up in people's lives. We have an arrangement with, if you're familiar with Crooked Media or Pod Save America, in the spring they'll be pushing this out to everybody who signed up for one of their products in the last year or listens to it as a test case. And we're specifically going to do this, which is everybody, just gonna do this so I don't rip it away, around a given point, it'll give you the 5 nearest addresses, and it'll just ask you, would you mind going and helping your neighbors either register or ask them, what it was that kept them from voting. Like, what would they need to actually, take that last step? And we intend to run that, and we're gonna publish those results publicly.
I figured this is an effort so new that it's just not.
I haven't done it yet. So the Secretary of State only released who voted on January 2nd. So I've only just gotten the calculations done by district and county and demographic as to who those are. And I feel like I owe a report to our generous $5 donors, like I said earlier, just in keeping with good practices. But that's definitely what we're planning to do. There's time, so we want to build it well and make sure that it works well and doesn't violate people's sense of privacy. So an interesting thing about this during the election, a couple people would show other people the map and be like, "You're on the map," And most people really thought it was cool, and a solid handful thought, we were out to murder them.
I was actually just thinking of asking, do you get pushback from some of the people who don't want to vote when they find out they're on your tool
Totally.
here?
But the nice thing is you can just get cleared off. There's an option in the selection tree that people can just say
people
clear.
can opt out.
Yep.
Of course, they're not opting out of that. You're just scraping publicly available data, but you won't show them in this tool.
That's exactly right. So we do that. But what I want to always tell them is do you remember phone books? People think it's really weird that you could know someone's address. And I was like, I never thought it was strange. You got it delivered to your house, and you flipped it open, and I was like, in elementary school or middle school or whatever, you look up a friend and you get on your bike and you roll down to their house, and I didn't know where you lived before, but I found you. And that was totally not abnormal, but now we've moved away from that, and it is. People think it is so weird that it's publicly available, but there's literally a website called whitepages.com.
It's another adverse effect of the internet.
Yeah.
It's made knowing an address creepy.
It made it, and for totally valid reasons that people have concerns about safety, it's just that it's such a shift in behavior. Because I'm telling you, if anybody wants to find your address and you want to participate in society, it is super easy.
If any of you own any kind of property, it is absolutely trivial to find out where you live.
If you've ever downloaded any mobile game, yeah.
Or I guess expanding on that, it's a little bit more than just the white pages or something. You're doing subtractive filtering based
Yes.
on public data.
There is some
And
sort of
so
implication
are
about
you
it.
worried about, maybe unintentionally exposing a correlation you didn't think about?
Yes.
This is a Hispanic part of town, and for
Yep.
some reason these 2 blocks aren't in our system. There's an 80% chance they're undocumented.
Yes. So we thought about that. So the big thing that we looked at is that there's a database of dreamers, right, of where they live and their name and everything else. And there's a database actually of known undocumented immigrants, which is what they use to go actually, round people up. Right. Honestly, I could really use their database because I could screen all those people out. So if anybody knows somebody there, just have them slip me a thumb drive. But we did think about that. We tested it thoroughly before we ever put it online to make sure that it couldn't be used in that way. And so the answer is that the number of dreamers in the country is below 1% of these dots. And even though they do occur in clusters, we don't show any information that somebody could figure that out from. And it's not even scrapable because we only show a certain amount of dots at a time depending on the zoom level, and it maxes out at 500. So you can't even scrape, and there's no names, so you couldn't even identify the particular demographic you were looking for unless you already knew a lot about that area.
So the fact that you do limit the automatic scraping of your API, you're preventing somebody from taking a big data algorithm and trying to make a correlation pop out that could potentially target a vulnerable group from this data set.
Partially, I think anybody with that competency could achieve it by going to the state and getting the public data.
Just go to the public data.
So it's really it was a calculation for us of the benefit versus the potential harms. We considered that people who are mad about politics right now might go harass their neighbors, which we consider a form of encouragement. No, I would recommend inspiring. It's unfortunately right now people just walk around randomly house to house and they knock on every door, or they target them based on their primary voting history, right? Or
Bruce
He
Alpha
lived in
used
Travis,
to,
yeah.
if you wanted to go door to door, he could get you he was doing
there are
this.
free maps available for Travis
Yes.
County alone.
And so people would do this
Yep.
as a fun activity.
There's any number of heat maps out there. So we weighed this, we looked at it, we decided that it couldn't really be well used in that malign way. But it was a serious consideration of ours. We didn't want to enable the mistreatment of people. The goal was, it's like Nextdoor, right? Nextdoor is designed to be a place where you and your neighbors can all talk together. And I don't really use it, but I've seen it a few times, and universally the comments are atrocious, right? And it's just it's like asking everyone in your neighborhood to get together and say their worst YouTube comments aloud or something. It's just it's not an ideal communication method. Much better to get together and I think Nextdoor should be an events-only platform. There's a party, you can come interact with humans. It's harder to be nasty in person. It does depend entirely on the neighborhood. Great leadership changes that. And that's kind of what we're trying to promote here, is the idea that there are people out there who are very, very good at helping their own neighbors and helping their own community, and we want this to be available to them. Again, because the expectation that all of us have time to become an election expert and to dig into all this public data and to sift through all of these things, individually, seems just very bad. And the idea that neither Republicans nor Democrats have come up with a good way to let their own volunteers actually have access to the basic information of like who is even allowed to vote is kind of embarrassing. And so mostly we're just one-upping them. No. Yeah.
So publicly available information, that was decided to be public by somebody at some point.
The legislature, it's all statutory.
And so have you come across public information that you were like, wow, that was really dumb to make that public?
Yeah, so turns out public water utilities, so we all presumably, pay our water bill to the city of Austin. That's a public utility, which means I can FOIA that thing and get your name and address and how much money you paid and everything else. It's not like, it's a problem because the reason voter rolls became public in the first place was to combat the mistreatment of people by county and state officials. So, people would, oh, you want to register to vote? Cool, like tear this up, throw it in the trash can, light it on fire. There's like nothing you could do. They would just be like, no, we process their form. It's in the works, right? And like it'll, and they'd go do it in the back end or whatever. And so making the voter rolls public was a part of a federal effort to force states to be responsible to reporters and to candidates and to voters, because you can check if you've voted now. But before, nobody could check, so everyone was taking the Secretary of State at their word that like, oh, it's 203-0, like, don't know how that happened. And there was just no method of backing it up. So the intent of that move was to make it fairer. It's the same with public utility data, to make sure that people aren't being systematically mistreated for their race or their gender or their age. And so, I go back and forth on like, we're kind of in this impasse where we both want more digital privacy and we don't want to be manipulated and maligned. And at the same time, by making things public, you actually, if there are entities that use it, you can actually defend people from some of that malignment. And it's hard because there aren't a lot of great public entities that do that sort of work. So we kind of see the negatives a lot more than we see the positives. There's no group that monitors a Facebook, right?
I'm correct that while, as you said, there's a system that lets you verify that your vote was counted, it doesn't give any information about how you voted.
That's correct. At no point, nobody in the entire state ever knows how you voted because your name is never on, there's no name or ID number on any ballot. And so there's like a triple check process to make sure that the count of the number of people who signed in is the count of the number of codes entered on the machine is the count of the vote tally. So it's actually pretty secure in that regard for the purposes of voting. You're next.
Yeah, so you said you had an effort where you were trying to get people to go to their closest neighbor to help encourage them to vote.
Yep.
Do you have anything trying to exploit like a social graph of like?
Yes. So that was what I was intimating earlier. Is we can right now we have a tool that works that will show email, phone, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can put any of those exports in that you'd like. It's an engine that runs it, does the matching, builds on the social graph, but it tracks the sourcing, so it returns a list to you and only you, with the prompting from the system of like, here's an array of who would be useful to reach out to.
The next 5 people. Here's your next closest 5 friends to go.
Out of all your friends on your various accounts, you publicly list their address.
But we want to protect that sourcing so that if you ever said like, okay, I got the information I need, I want to delete it, you delete it, it undoes everything you put in. And so our idea with that is by leaning into the privacy fight, we can actually do more to help people rather than trying to be another Cambridge Analytica.
And I'm correct that you said that the code is openly available on GitHub, so a third party could audit what your code does?
It is for everything but the social graph. That would be a little bit more problematic. So that part is not per se, but it is compliant with GDPR, which has certain provisions and requirements. Okay. Amy, we were next.
I wondered if anybody had thought about genealogy.
Like the genealogy data?
there's a ton, for example, in Texas, if you are over 22, readily available is your date of birth, your parents' full names, including your mother's maiden name, what county you were born in. And from that data, you can actually build family trees because you can look for pairs of parents and then children and then cousins. And then you go to like sites like Ancestry.com or other sites, and there are whole trees. I mean, you can really, literally. I'm not saying that this would necessarily be it's one of those good ideas that can be used either way.
Sure. I don't know of anyone using it on the political side, and I think my intuition would be that the automation of that kind of work is pretty much housed in the Ancestry.coms and 23andMe's of the world. You're saying there's publicly available?
Texas, it's incredibly publicly available.
But I just mean the actual running of the analysis and the matching and the record matching to public files presumably is a little bit more complex, especially given the volume of women whose names would change after a certain amount of time.
Well, because of the stickiness of Texas,
that's right.
People don't tend to leave as much.
I don't know anything about anybody using it for political purposes.
Because those marriages are also recorded with the full names of the spouses and their ages.
But you can search that on the internet?
Yes, it's all public information.
I will take a look just to see what could be done with it. But
you could. No, I've done it.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. So I don't know anything about that per se, so I really couldn't comment more on it.
Interface design question for you.
Yes.
If I'm interpreting this correctly, each dot is a household, not necessarily a registered voter. You mentioned low fidelity data.
That's correct.
What does an apartment complex look like here? I can see where this works really well for single family homes.
Is there a known Wi-Fi password here? This can be very easily done. I got it. I got a hotspot. I will show you. So we scraped every apartment complex in the country and inferred their unit numbers based on their postal codes. And that includes duplexes, quadplexes, anything of the sort. So I can show you an apartment complex. It basically, we're adding in a different color to make it easier to see, or a different probably style. And then you click it, it gives you a breakout by unit number, which ones you need to go to. So people inside of apartments can use it as well. And the goal is to make this actually a much better interface. We had an interface before that was all volunteer developed. One of those volunteers worked for a company and a PAC who both claimed ownership of any of his IP, of any code he developed. And he worked on our front end and design. And so in order to spare him from legal battles and us, we just excised the entire front end that we were using before the election. There's actually an article in Wired that has photos of the original interface, but we had a UI, UX designer work on it a lot. And we've gone back to a simpler heat map to avoid just getting him into a mess. Great employment contracts we all have here. You had a question.
Yeah, I want to ask. So you voted absentee at some point in the past, and that kind of links into the voter privacy thing. I think a lot of us would be interested in. I'm curious what your thoughts are in general, and I guess everyone else is kind of. Do you feel like absentee ballot is like seeding a little bit of our secret ballot sort of concept in this country, where there is the potential for someone to try and coerce you to vote a certain way.
Yes.
If you have a piece of paper where you're putting your votes on it. So how do you feel about that in the context of making more broadly available versus maintaining their privacy?
So in general, in a bygone era, there was a lot more coercion that took place in forcing people to vote a certain way. It's still a problem in places that have vote by mail, but it has generally been seen as a pretty small scale one. There's a professor at UC Irvine, I think his name is Richard Hazen, does election law, and they've actually studied this particular issue because it's kind of one of the counterpoints. But I'll pull this up and run it. But essentially, expanding access to vote by mail dramatically increases the number of people who vote. And the number of self-reports of coercion or problems are exceedingly rare, except for this year in North Carolina. One congressional district, there's 2 counties where a gentleman appears to have engaged in a by the thousands vote harvesting scheme where they stole elderly voters' ballots right out of their mail and filled them out for them. That's a pretty rare thing, and fortunately did not get away with it. But you can't entirely avoid that, especially in the family itself. There's issues of parents filling out their kids' ballots because they didn't like the way their kids were planning to vote. Kids filling out their parents' ballots is pretty common, especially if you have elderly parents who are under care. There's lots of people who will take that. It's very hard to catch. It's pretty much impossible in my mind to stop. And it's right. But if you limit it to people who can only go in person, you kind of reduce the entire disability community's ability to do it, the elderly, which is incredibly disenfranchising. And the reason we adopted that vote by mail procedure was to help fix the problem of people being discriminated against based on age and disability. So it's an unfortunate trade-off, and I think in general, trusting in the mostly goodwill of most people inside their own families seems to work out okay, I would say. It doesn't appear to be that it's even close to equivalent. And in particular, states like Oregon don't have any in-person voting, and they have the highest rate of participation in both registration and turnout. So everyone is automatically registered, everyone gets mailed a ballot automatically. They fill it out at leisure, at home, they can drop it off in person, they can mail it back. It makes it really simple. North Dakota doesn't even have voter registration. They just use normal county records. So there's both a super liberal state and a super conservative state have a good system where almost everyone's able to vote just fine. They both maintain control by their respective political party. One didn't result in the flip of the other. So it seems to me that the most likely case is that if we expand access to voting, conservative areas will register more conservative voters, liberal areas will register more liberal voters, and if you think that poorer people who actually would then show up to vote would vote a certain way, then you might have a different outcome. But otherwise, it's been a fair bit of a wash so far.
So out of curiosity, so one of the anytime there's initiatives or tools or whatever with the goal to increase voter registration, you inevitably get pushback from Republicans who claim that, well, we can't do this thing because we actually have a massive voting fraud problem.
Yes.
Barring the fact that there is no evidence that we actually have a massive voting fraud problem, have you thought about ways to use maybe this public data and these tools to bolster arguments of saying, no, really, look, there's no fraud problem, and I can prove it using this data, You can verify for yourself. We don't have a problem.
I don't know that we could achieve that argument with what we've designed, and I'm not confident it would be better than the actual studies that have been undertaken by some of the other
I guess I'm just thinking first, maybe there are people who they don't believe the studies because it's a liberal academic, sure. But if they can verify with the records for themselves that...
I think that might make an impact to a limited degree.
Anything's better than nothing.
But in particular, it really doesn't show that someone else didn't cheat. Does that make sense? So it can verify someone didn't cheat you specifically, but it doesn't actually show you that...
I was just curious if, based on what is publicly available, if you guys had any discussions with whatever data is publicly available, if there would be a way to investigate that.
We haven't talked about it. I don't see an easy and obvious way, and I think it's mostly a cultural argument at this point. I'm
just asking.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is actually just to help your local counties, your local city governments, actually communicate and talk with people inside their districts. The main problem is that small counties are dramatically underfunded, right? There's one full-time judge and a part-time worker who will together try to handle several thousand people's, information, and that can be pretty difficult to grapple with for them, especially if they're 80 years old, they're doing their best, they don't know what every year the state puts out a new confounded computer system, and some guy's walking around with a map, I'm not even sure why he's here. He's got a weird long hair and beard thing going on, must be a hippie from Austin. It's just it's stuff like that, right? That you're contending with in trying to, more often the problem is negligence or scale than it is malice, right? So people are confused by this thing of 325 million people running around voting in ways that don't make sense to them because of because of people siloing themselves off, you see a lot of folks who will say, like, I don't know a single Democrat, or I don't know a single Republican. So how on earth could Hillary Clinton have gotten more votes? How on earth could Donald Trump have won the election? I literally can't name one. And so they're actually struggling with the mental grappling of, like, 300 million people is just a lot. And it's just an order of magnitude that human brains can't deal with, and it's very unlikely that we're going to do a great job of convincing them otherwise. In the meantime, it's really about, if anything, it's the authority figures, right? So it's going to certain people and convincing them that it's in their best interest to not have a mob angry about the election outcome. But to this end, there's lots of people who feel like they get political traction out of it. And so I would be very interested in anybody's idea to help combat those ideas. I honestly think some of the research out there they have great graphics, great reports, but of course nobody gives a crap what the Florida Atlantic University research study says, because none of us have even heard of that damn school.
So a comment on that, I think that blockchain and some of these sort of technological things probably solve some of these issues, but one important thing would be lost, and that's anonymity.
To some degree, yes. I think there's people who feel like they could help resolve some of that. What they're more concerned with so there was a blockchain experiment in West Virginia for absentee voters and overseas voters, because it was pretty safe to do there. No one thought the election was going to flip. And they haven't released a report of how that went yet, or how many people used it. The general concern from cybersecurity experts is that it's not the algorithm of blockchain, like the math that goes into it, that is the problem. It's the internet architecture. And so right now, pretty much anything in the DC region or any of the major industrial regions, the actual internet infrastructure is hacked, by foreign espionage groups who are trying to get military information from companies. And it's pretty easy to do. Like, we did a great job with electromagnetic rings in Russia back in the 80s, right? And it's just like a constant battle back and forth between our cybersecurity institutions and others. And if you can read the underlying infrastructure, that actually circumvents the blockchain defense of the actual data packets. And so while the algorithm on both ends is safe, it's the in-between connection that is considered to be vulnerable right now. So it doesn't necessarily solve that. And what it does do is kind of prevent auditing. So there's some concern, I think, and again, not a blockchain expert. I merely take the kind of folks who are out there at their word on this. So there's disagreement right now, and so they're testing it. I don't know how that will shape out. I would love for someone with quantum encryption in America to come up with a better solution. Honestly, paper seems to work mostly just fine, and lots of states have machines that print a paper ballot out, and you turn that in. It's a Scantron. It gets read, and then there's a ticket that comes out of the machine at the end as well. So you have a count from Scantrons, you have a count from the machines, you have a count from the poll books. People can verify themselves online. Like, there's a number of checks and balances to that sort of methodology that seem to be pretty robust. And it gives people two opportunities to verify that their vote is correct, on the machine and on the printed receipt. And they have an opportunity to fix it. So in my mind, that kind of simple solution is a little bit better. What I would worry about is someone particularly clever who doesn't share our values somehow finding a way to manipulate something where we've kind of put it all in one silo. And I think there's just, from my special operations hat, there's risk there. So for example, when I was in the military, one of my jobs was traveling around the world doing hostage rescue. And people used to consider WhatsApp like a very secure messaging service. And it was great when everybody felt like that was true. We really appreciated it when ISIS and other groups would communicate on WhatsApp, even though it had end-to-end encryption. But then somebody leaked it, and then they all switched to Telegram, which was secure for a time, and then they all switched to Wicker, and a number of other, like Signal, I think, is probably still safe.
I haven't heard Signal's been ruined yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer to that is it's an arms race, and like wouldn't count on county and state governments being able to keep up on like something as advanced as the blockchain front.
And I guess, I'm not a blockchain expert, but I am a programmer. So I guess just to speak to what I heard a little bit in your question, first of all, I'd say from a basic cybersecurity standpoint, you're always going to want paper ballot backups just because no electronic system is completely secure from a hacking attempt. So you're always going to want a physical medium backup that cannot be hacked unless you actually pay somebody to mess with the balance, which is much harder. Second of all, I think to your point that you were making of like, oh well, blockchain sure makes voter fraud go to zero, but it also maybe ruins the closed ballot because everybody's votes are public. I think there'd be ways around that, like that you could encrypt the payload of what a person's actual votes were, and you'd need the right keys to decrypt the payload of the blockchain.
Well, if you look at like Monero, it solved a lot of those problems in a monetary way for private transactions. But I guarantee you, 50 years from now, somebody with a quantum computer is going to be going through all that data and being like, okay, you bought this from that person then, and all that crap.
Well, yeah, when they get quantum computers off the ground, all our bank statements will be public knowledge.
Yeah, the answer is like, what we're all working on in our industry will vastly outpace what anybody's ever able to keep up. But I have some words of wisdom from our friends at XKCD.
Everyone will die.
So on the map, are you able to identify like gerrymandering breaks?
We can, yes. We actually have a full shapefile of integrated districts of all types, and we're continuing to add to that.
So increased voter registration in certain neighborhoods would potentially flip a gerrymander?
We can identify areas where like a vote would be more impactful based on it could have stacked or overlaid competitive districts, like a county commissioner's race and a state house race and a state senate race and a congressional race. So like this particular sliver of 1,000 people, their votes would have 6 times the competitive weight. We have all of that is done. We haven't decided how to deploy it because it really kind of defeats the neighborhood methodology to some degree. What's convenient about this is I have people who walk their dog and they register voters, right? Like there's a very simple approach, or they can go out in the neighborhood. But there are other people who are power users who would want to use it for a targeted purpose. And we are thinking about making it a filter option, if that makes sense. But we've built the filter, we just haven't decided if it will distract from the purpose. Because if people take 3 hours to drive to the best competitive area, where they're probably going to get 10 to 50 people registered, but then they drive 3 hours back, they've lost the chance to do 100 or 150 in their own neighborhood, if that makes some sense. But for some people, that's what they care about, and we kind of want to enable them any way we can. So we're thinking about it. But it's a pretty easy shapefile solution.
So I have I'm one of those that would want to go, there.
Sure.
Because one of the things that we observed during the campaign is that at the end of the day, number of votes count. But the impact of going to a neighborhood that there are almost nobody that votes because people never went there, if you get to really talk to 2 people there, it's worth the same amount of talking to 30 people in a very populated area, because that one person plants a seed that person is going to be that catalyst. So because of that, I think it's very helpful to have the info, like, this.
I mean, I built it, so I kind of intend to use it. But we want to think thoughtfully about the impacts of what we do, because we might be depriving people who are in need of a community intervention, but they're not in a competitive, quote unquote, location, right? We don't want everyone to ignore them. Does that make some sense? So that's the only trade-off we're kind of weighing, is that yes, in the world of political gamesmanship, it does matter where you vote. And the electoral geography is important, but also people's ability to exercise their basic right is kind of important to us as well. And so trying to blend those together is, I think if just providing more information is going to help you all make that choice. So I'm inclined to lean that way, but we want to make sure that we're not creating an incentive structure that ignores certain groups of people. Does that make sense?
No, and actually, and I guess maybe my point was misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because from a campaign perspective, right, the goal was to always target the areas that had more people.
Yeah,
Because it's bigger bang for the buck.
Yes.
But
density.
Then sometimes the areas that were always neglected were not prioritized because there were not as many people because they were never voted.
Yes.
But it's like seeing that from the point of view of going where nobody goes.
Yep.
Is like so I have that perspective.
I think that's exactly right. One of the things we've created that is being tested on different mobile versions right now is a little finger drawing tool. So you two could be working together and you could basically zoom into this neighborhood and draw your finger around a couple of houses and assign to Julie, and then draw your finger around another couple of houses and assign to self, right? And then the two of you could go off and circle back to each other, and somebody could do that from wherever. So we're working with the disability community on ways to make this accessible, so it's not just a go to someone's house tool. We're looking at different methods there, and so to that end, the idea would be you could go recruit somebody in that area, and then they could become the person. They just get like sometimes seeing the 500 dots is too much for folks. If you zoom in more, it becomes a lot more manageable, right? So like you can tell which half of the neighborhood I live in, right? So there's a Vaughn over here is the dividing line of where I live. Like these three people just moved in, okay, give me a break. So I've gotta go get them soon. And there's a bunch of new houses being constructed, but like I've cleared the board of about 250 people over the last 6 months, mostly as test cases. Like, what are the errors? What am I doing wrong? How can I make this better for everybody?
In terms of political games, Kevin mentioned the 86 regular session starting.
Kevin.
If you go to capital.texas.gov right now and search for, I guess, just voter registration, it'll show 31 bills. Bring that up with reference to two that already have companion bills, which means they're much further or much more likely to get through, and that's Senate Bill 103, House Bill 140. That's the automatic voter registration for driver's license and IDs.
So that is a specific case. So in Texas, you need, when you go to the DPS to renew your driver's license, you can register to vote in person on an electronic signing machine, like think 15-year-old credit card signing thing. They're finally catching up. It still needs a pen, can't do it with a finger. The online portal where you can renew your driver's license has no option for you to do the same thing. And so the interpretation in other states has been that under a 1993 law called the Motor Voter Law, the state has to provide people, when they engage with a state services system, the opportunity to register to vote. And since they're engaging online, the state should have to provide something, which would make it really simple for all of us because we could just renew our driver's license right now and get a whole bunch of people registered. Thank you so much. So to that effect, that bill is addressing that particular lawsuit. I don't know how that one's going to go because it's kind of a public black eye for Texas right now, and at the same time the law is on. We won in district, well, I say we won. The ability to forcing the state to do this was the district court outcome, and the Attorney General has appealed it to the circuit court, the Fifth Circuit Court, who is a very likely defender of whatever interpretation Governor Abbott would want to take. So he will win this political fight most likely if he wants to. But there are advocates, like Republicans in rural areas feel like their communities are struggling, and it would help to have these systems because their DPS offices have been closed in their districts. So there's a co-sponsor, the guy who's the chairman of the rural caucus has been a Republican who's been very supportive. And so there's people who just feel like it's unfair and they don't care about which party it affects. But then there's other people who see a political game to everything, and once you take a stance, you can't move off of it, that sort of thing. So it's tricky to see how that one will play out because Governor Abbott has veto authority and has threatened to use it on this bill. Republicans probably wouldn't override. There's probably not enough of them. And so it just matters whether one of them could convince him that it would be worth it. So I don't know how to predict that one. It is also an ongoing lawsuit. And it's all kind of, it's very nuanced, it's very complicated, but the outcome is just that most people aren't paying attention and talking to the governor about that. In particular, they're talking so similar to the two things that people most say are the reasons they don't vote. The two reasons they say they vote the most in Texas are immigration and border security as two separate categories, which makes up more than 5 times as much as any other category like healthcare when you add those two together. So UT's been running a study every year asking people what matters to them, and the top 2 things in Texas are always border security and immigration. And so whatever side people fall in that debate, those are just the issue that half of Texans are bringing up the most. So this kind of niche thing about like repairing a technical improvement to the online driver's license renewal process, I don't know how that's going to go. It could slip through. It could, slip out.
How much better than the van is that map when it comes to like when you're walking down the street? Because like in the van, it's like terrible when you're walking on the street because like 4 houses are clustered together, even though they're like spread out.
I was telling everybody about this problem beforehand.
Oh, my bad.
No, not this specific thing. So I had this guy working on this problem, and we fixed the geocodes that you're referring to. So the reason it looks like this right now is these are 10-digit geocodes, and they should be 12-digit. Because if anybody knows anything about GIS, 10-digit is within 10 to 20 meters, and 12 digits is within 1 meter. And so that's the lat longe is just not. They didn't put enough digits in the van specifically. The service provider they're using, they went with the cheap option. So it's close, but not exact. The version that we ran during this last cycle was more exact, but we were using the guy who was working with us is a senior engineer at Waymo and Google Maps, and his IP has been laid claim to. So we cut out all of the stuff he built just to avoid anybody getting in trouble. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're literally right now, it's going to be 14 days until all the geocodes are updated again. And I'm on like day 3. It's running on my machine at home right now. So I heard a question.
No, she had her.
Julie.
Well, so I know that you had a couple of different approaches for getting people registered. Like you did the hanging bags for people who were walking around if someone wasn't home, or some campaigns sent out mailers via you, and then also there was the online. Were there any differences between those which were more effective for registering voters, and then which were more effective for getting people to vote?
The most effective method is people signing themselves up because someone sends it to them. So people texting each other the link. We had little UTMs in the codes that we would put in ads and other things. That is by far the most effective. We saw like plus 90% of the people get registered and vote. So somebody who is like, you know what, I want to vote, type in my information, be aware of this thing, mail it in, go vote. It's most likely someone who was gonna vote anyway in any other method, and this was just convenient. The largest scale approach is mail, direct mail. So we identified everyone who moved into the state of Texas in the last 18 months and had not yet registered to vote at their new address in Texas. And we mailed them all a letter and a form, and that was by far the largest program at scale. And the hit rate is just merely how long they had before the deadline. People who had a month and a half before the deadline, it was 40% completion. People, it was a week before the deadline, they had 10% completion. And it's basically linear from there. So we're going to start every month so that it just takes care of that particular problem. That's people moving to the state or moving around the state county by county. I'm curious, did anybody get a letter in the mail from any of us? Did anybody move here in the last 2 years?
I mean, I did, but I immediately registered to vote at my new address.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Is that moving to Texas, or is that moving to a new place?
Crossing a county line in Texas or crossing the state line?
So you didn't target like within.
If people stayed in the same county, they can still vote. And I had limited resources, so I just didn't want to. It's my bank account, so I prioritize.
You said that you talked to the Secretary of State about this during the last election cycle, and now the current Secretary of State has stepped down.
Mm-hmm.
Are you planning on going and talking to whoever?
We absolutely will.
Up?
We ran a ton of studies that showed how they can save a lot of money and labor. So increased morale, decreased costs, increased effectiveness of the department, like when you're the Secretary of State, that kind of looks good, right? And Ted Cruz still won, so he can tout it however he likes. So, you know, I don't think there's a particular issue on that front. We help that department run more efficiently with a system that just uses people's existing. It's literally the only change we made to like the system the state currently uses is we set up a system that mails it back to the right county automatically. So it prints a variable return address label for the 254 counties and then tracks that. And that is a revolutionary change for them. They are very appreciative. We will keep working with them as much as we can. The idea is like if the state government works better, people will trust it more. They will feel like they have more access. The people inside of it will be more proud and able to help people. And that gets the outcome I think that we want, which is for people to feel like they have a say and for the rest of us to get a better government that's not crazy. Like if you take anything to an extreme, you end up with something that doesn't represent the bulk of the people. And you know, we see that revisited from time to time. And I think it's working. There's lots of groups working on voter registration in Texas now, where previously, before 2016, everybody had given up on Texas in a really big way. And so things are changing now. Like we're about to be the #1 battleground state in the country, which means like presidential candidates will be coming here and they'll be trying to come get into groups like this to speak to 50 people at once to try to get votes for the primary, because they're going to need delegates. If there's 20 candidates running in the primary, then all of a sudden nobody's very likely to get 50%, which means that it's a brokered convention, which means people like delegates get to horse trade over who gets to be president. It'll be a great HBO movie. I'm trying to get the Wi-Fi contract. So if I have the Wi-Fi contract, I promise to read and publish every text message about who became president, because that'll be fascinating. I mean, it's like a realistic problem that everybody's going to have. So Texas is about to go through a momentous change. Floridians are like very used to getting just besieged by mail and TV and radio ads and like people coming door to door. And like if people thought that Beto's text messages and stuff were annoying, like wait till everybody's doing it. It's going to be great. Like we're all just going to be like, another text message is probably not from a friend. I don't know. I saw a hint. Yeah.
Thinking about the non-voters,
Yep.
Any thoughts on turning them into protest voters?
So that falls in the same camp as any of the others, trying to get them to vote, somebody who votes for
Vermin Supreme, for example.
Just like a random, whatever.
Or you vote for an independent like Gary Johnson, or you vote for Jill Stein.
Well, don't disparage Vermin Supreme. I want that pun.
So, as long as everyone in the survey puts their religion as Jedi, the way New Zealand did, one of New Zealand's official religions is Jedi, because more people selected that than any other religion on their 2000 census. And by the laws of New Zealand, they had to include it as an official state religion. So if we all do the same thing, it'll be hilarious. It falls in the same camp as trying to get them to vote, which is kind of a category called persuasion. You have to convince someone who doesn't regularly vote to go do a thing. And so most issue groups and political groups probably wouldn't be so interested in putting their resources into go, please tell us all to fuck off. But there's not really, the thing about like an anarchic vote is there's not really an organized group to help promote it. So I don't really see that sort of taking off. Think of it as like an interesting social challenge, but much more likely is that a third-party candidate that was compelling could easily win. So for all of the vaunted interest of this year's race, there were 4 million people who voted for Beto O'Rourke and 4.2 million who voted for Ted Cruz. So for a total of 8.2, there's 21.5 million adults in Texas who are citizens that could have voted. So like 13.5 million people didn't vote. So and they each only got 4 million. So like one person who came in and got a third of the remaining vote would win the election. And so the door is wide open. We just kind of culturally, we all believe that it's not, right? But the answer is 2/3 or 3/5 of people in most states are not voting at all. And so it's really kind of anyone's to win if someone can crack the code as to how to persuade someone to believe in them, trust them, whatever that reason is, distrust the system, show the parties that they're failing, whatever that is. The door is open, and I think the main thing that's lying in front of it is that we all have habits. So like we're all here, we're kind of interested in this topic. I guarantee when we go home, there's going to be Netflix, Xbox, PC, work. A lot of us are going to do work. Family requirements, education requirements. Like we all have habits that we have to get back into. We got to check our email, schedule our calendar events, right? Like, and it's hard to dramatically change people's habits for like I need you to go spend 25 minutes on one day going through and picking this thing that you have to do a lot of research for to feel like you have any, like I think I'm pretty well informed on this stuff, and I had to prep a long time for my ballot because I was like, there's a lot of judicial candidates and I want to pretend I know what I'm talking about when I vote between them, but I literally can't find their websites and I can't find anything about them. I don't know who these people are. What would they do with their power in court? How do I look at their prior court decisions? And then like, do I really have time to bother with this when my vote is not going to change that, right? Like it's a problem that all of us can recognize. So I think it's a hard challenge. And like the main thing is that I find encouraging is there's a whole new crop of people who are stepping up to run for various positions who are kind of a different caliber of what we're used to. So previously you went to Yale Law School, you came from like a particular scion family, or you had a lot of money independently to be able to run. And what's changing now is like people are getting money through online donations, viral videos. They're communicating directly on their phone to a particular subset of people who show up to vote for them, and they're getting elected on the back of that. And so like that seems promising once we figure out a good way to vet those people. So I don't know. I think it's just as hard in my mind, or perhaps harder, than just getting them to vote for one of the candidates that's on the ballot. Plus, they have to be creative enough in the moment. 40 things going on. Like, how many names can you come up with on a write-in? Like,
So you mentioned that you're trying to get somebody to do a thing that they normally haven't not done.
Yeah.
Is there a set of services or a set of actions that people who don't vote do disproportionately more of than other voters?
There's like interesting studies on
order
this.
Dominoes.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, honestly, I feel like that's probably important. Man, if only we could convince Domino's. It's weird. Most of the pizza joints have strong political leanings. There's actually, so Cards Against Humanity does this thing every year where they order tens of thousands of pizzas on election day and they have them delivered to polling locations for the voters who are in line. So like, pizza is a motivator.
Even better, they currently have a Trump Cards edition, which is exactly what it sounds like. And if you buy it, they are buying land along the border to block the border wall. So go buy Cards Against Humanity.
See how well that works. There's things like, so NASCAR is like one of the top ones. People who watch WWE, a lot of football, like just sports in general.
Stereotype they already implicitly believe.
There's definitely some amount of stereotypes to it, right? Gamers are a huge category that is like highly mixed. There's like a percentage of gamers who like very intensively vote and know a lot of things, right? Like, and then there's this massive category of younger gamers mostly who never have heard of voting, or most candidates who are running. There's people who watch particular channels in YouTube or categories in YouTube. There's been an effort to try to start figuring out, are they voters or not? It's kind of an open field in this regard. So traditionally speaking, the campaign apparatus and electoral pieces are, how do you make better TV ads? Better production values, soaring music, like here's me talking with locals, like that sort of thing for 30 seconds. And we all see tens of thousands of those, and they look like stock ads, and that's because they are stock ads. But there's like this effort to make better versions of those and sell them more widely on television. And that's like the main purpose of all political data people, is to figure out where to put the TV ads and in what proportions. And like that seems like entirely the wrong method. There's like, you can do stuff on mobile ads, you can do stuff on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can do stuff on Snapchat. There's just any number of people are siloing themselves in meetups and all kinds of things that are publicly they're indicating their preferences online. People are louder and more public with their views than they've ever been in the past. So like somebody, honestly, like people who bring commercial products in that are good at this and turn them around to work on political problems, there's an enormous marketplace. So that's like been a stark change that's occurred since 2016, is there's been a bunch of people jumping ship to work on a political tech company that's building a 4-year-old modern tech company thing, because you don't need the bleeding edge right now. We don't need AI-related insights and neural networks. We literally need heat maps. This is the first heat map that a political campaign has been using.
And that's what I was asking, was like how,
Yeah.
is there infrastructure in reaching this audience that you could just piggyback off of?
Not really, unless you're particularly gifted at like the digital ads that do exist out there. But even then, so for example, like the mobile market has been trying to push, like Funware has been trying to push the idea of like putting more political ads in like mobile games because they have high, I forget the industry term, but what was it, Russ? Right, the response rate, click-throughs, but also just they complete the ad, right? So people watch the full 30-second ad. And the interpretation from the advertisers is like the ad is working, people aren't switching the channel, but it's like, no, they want to play the game. Like, that person is waiting to play their game, and they just don't want to pay $2.99 to not have ads.
So with that, I want to thank our speaker for a wonderful discussion.
You can take the Register to Vote app for a test drive by going to register2vote.org. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney, and this is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.